testimony to start out. Work right now, I'm going to trial represent somebody that lost their temper, did something they shouldn't have. Otherwise, he's never been in any trouble before. I have another trial coming up that's a similar situation, except the person ended up doing something much worse. But same thing, no criminal record or anything, which a lot of the people that I represent, they've had a lifetime of mistakes. Some of them are interested in changing, some of them are not. Every now and then I represent somebody who is either young and they haven't gotten in much trouble yet, but they're kind of heading down the wrong path, or sometimes people that have made it through 40 years, or sometimes even longer, without ever getting in any kind of trouble. Not just like they avoided, trouble, like they never did anything that was worth being arrested for. And then something happens. And a lot of times it involves mental health situation. Somebody has a break or a snap, going through some serious stress. It turns out for the last 20 years, they've just been kind of hanging on by a thread internally, and then they kind of snap. Other times it's just based on the situation. Especially when it comes to hurting or even killing somebody else. A lot of times you don't know how you're going to react in a situation until you're actually in it. Somebody harms your family, and you might turn around and kill them. But it got me thinking a lot dealing with this. A lot of times I spend time reflecting inwardly. My wife pointed it out to me. It bothers me a lot that people don't really, they say they believe in it, and I deal with their jurors all day long when I'm selecting jurors. They believe in things our Constitution says. Everybody's familiar with guilty until proven innocent, but nobody really does that. They don't believe it. And I actually talk about it in court. I'd say, like, even me as a defense attorney, my first reaction when I see somebody on the side of the road in handcuffs, I think, well, what did they do? I don't think, well, what are they accused of doing? Or did they really commit a crime? Sometimes I may think that, but it's human nature. You see somebody in trouble and you assume that they put themselves there, that they must have done something wrong to begin with. And then I go on to talk about in court how that's not what we're supposed to do in court. The whole point is not to say, well, that's how I am all the time, because you're not. If you say so, you're a liar. That's just the truth. Because you're a human being, just like me and everybody else. But when you're in a situation like that, you're supposed to recognize it. Say, okay, that might be how I think walking around in the street, but I'm going to make a conscious effort in here to not think like that. Because in here in the courtroom, I'm just supposed to listen to the evidence here and not pay attention to those kind of feelings, because that's the only way that we can get as close as possible to making a trial be just about what happened and not about your personal feelings and your emotions and that time when you got robbed 20 years ago and how that made you mad. So I talk when I'm on a trial, especially. I talk to 180 strangers from our community a day. Picking through people, listening to conversations, and the longer that I've done this job, the more I've realized how the majority of people don't don't see someone accused of a crime as human or like them. And I think when you look on the news and you see somebody accused or even convicted of, say, murder, I doubt you ever think, well, I'm like that person. Because you would never commit murder. I would never do that. And so you separate them. They don't look like you. They don't think like you. They've done something that you would never do. So you think of them differently. But in my job, I sit down and meet with these people on a daily basis. And I see that they have children, and they have moms and dads, and they have siblings. A lot of times, especially, like I said, in situations like a couple of cases I have right now, they've led very normal lives in comparison. So when I realize that, I turn inwardly a lot, and I think, well, if this person's capable of doing that, why am I different? And if you spend thinking about that about anybody, it doesn't have to be somebody accused of a crime, just somebody who you think is different than you. Stop and think about it. Why are you different? Is it because of how you were taught? I know people who were taught the same as me, but decided to do things differently. Is it because of where you were blessed in being born? The family that raised you? Maybe it's just the personality you were born with. Some people are hot-tempered, some people are not. And we always talk about this idea of personal responsibility. Everybody is responsible for their own actions. That's what free will is about. I believe God gave us the opportunity to make all of those decisions. But a lot of times when, if you know there's options A through Z, you've been taught that, then you can make that choice. You've never been taught that, or maybe you only know that there's option A, K, P, Q, R, S. You've never even heard of the other options. How can you even make those choices if you don't even know they exist? So why are none of you all billionaires? I bet it's because you didn't learn about private equity when you were 10 years old. And you don't understand how to leverage family wealth to turn $100,000 into several $1 million. Because you weren't raised in a family that everybody in the family knows how to do that and they can afford to pay people to do it for them. Otherwise, I bet you would all be billionaires. I probably would be too. So why are you different than them? I'm sure you would be happy to be a billionaire. Why can't you be? You just make wrong choices. Why didn't you choose to be a billionaire? You should have made that choice. I think about these things a lot, and I don't really have an answer to what makes me different, other than I rely on God. I've been in situations I know where I probably should have lost my life and I didn't, and I thank God for that. I don't know if it was because of a plan He had for me or why, but I don't understand. I've been in situations where I probably should have been in a lot more trouble than I got in, and I didn't. But the only thing that I know for sure is that I pray, and when I have a moment to stop and think about it, I ask God to step in and take care of it for me. And I think about it particularly when I lose my temper. I think I have a reputation around most circles that I'm in as being very calm, cool, and collected in most situations. I think I try to be the mediator a lot of times. And in other circles I've been in, and people who witnessed it, they think that I'm really quick to lose my temper. And I have been. And that's probably because most of the time I keep it at bay, and then finally it builds up and it all comes out in a situation where I lose my temper towards them. When that happens, you say and do things that you regret. I'm guilty of doing that a lot lately. Not hurting anybody physically, passing judgment on people. I get fed up with some of the things I was just talking about. I don't understand why people who claim to be Christian can't see those things and can't see that those are the things that Jesus said to do. That Jesus said to look at the murderer and say, why is he different than you? He's not. The least of these will be the greatest and all that. And it makes me angry because, and I wasn't as good at it before as I try to be now. I'm still not good at it. I lose my temper and say mean things all the time. I wish I didn't do it. But I try really hard not to, and I know the choices that I have. And I know a lot of that because I'm reading the New Testament, especially. I know that there's more responsibility on me because I know what's wrong, and if you do what's wrong when you know it, it's worse than the person who doesn't know that they're doing wrong. Jesus taught that. Everybody in the world is taught that. Every legal system that has any kind of trial behind it by judge or jury believes that because they punish things differently in situations. If you don't know what you're doing, sometimes that's not as bad as punishment. So anyway, I guess that's a little bit of my testimony today. I'm trying to be better to keep my temper, especially as lately my temper has been attached to judgment and to coming to terms with the fact that a lot of people I respected because I thought they felt and acted certain ways, I've come to realize don't, or at least don't act like it or say it. It makes me angry. This morning, all I want to do, like I've been talking about, I've been going back as close to the source as I can. Because people say Jesus said this and Jesus said that. Let's just see what we know to the best of our ability what Jesus actually said. Remember, I keep saying this idea as we can rely on Paul, but he relied on those that were before him. Closest thing that we have is Matthew as the most complete record of Jesus' life and teachings and sermons. I actually recently learned that the general consensus has been based on like clues in the writing and stuff like that. The fact that it was written in Greek was it wasn't written until the guesses range from like 50 to 90. So we're talking about 5, 6, 7 decades after Christ. If it was in 50 or 60, then that would have been like 20 or 30 years after the crucifixion. I think that's how it works. If 0 was Christ's birth, the crucifixion was 32 years after that. That's the closest that we can get, is somebody who was there, repeated what he heard and saw to as many people as he could, spread it around. And then within 10, 20 years, somebody said, okay, we need to write that down so we have a written record of it. And then a few different people wrote down records of it. Some of them were a little bit different from each other. They include details that others don't. Some parts of it match up completely. But I want to start with what I keep saying. I've come to accept that I think the outline for the teachings of Jesus Christ is the Sermon on the Mount, which I also recently learned in Luke is referred to as the Sermon on the Plain. And nobody's really sure if those are the same sermons or if this was just a obviously these are the things that Jesus was teaching. Maybe this was a sermon that he regularly gave. He'd go up on a mount, pray, and then come down and preach to the crowds. Because the way Luke describes it, it's a little bit different. It's not as long, it doesn't go into as much detail. I think it's interesting to call it Sermon on the Plain, because I guess in Luke's recording, it kind of comes down to a field, and where he delivers the sermon is on a flat area, and somewhere somebody got in an argument maybe about, well, no, he was up higher on the hill when he started preaching. Well, no, he didn't start preaching until he came down to the bottom of the hill. Or maybe he was preaching while he was walking down the hill, and then he got to the bottom where everybody was. And little differences like that, those are human differences that cause all of the factions over 2,000 years in our church of how things were said, why they were said, and whether or not it's really important. Did he preach when he was standing on a hill, or did he preach when he was at the bottom of the hill? Let's turn to Matthew, 4th chapter. Actually, I want to start not with Sermon on the Mount, but Matthew 10. And this morning I want to read, I know I've been reading a lot before in recent weeks in the New American Standard Bible. I'm going to read some of this, and it's called the Amplified Bible. And what it is it's instead of trying to reduce Aramaic or Hebrew, or in this case Greek words down to just one word, sometimes one word in English doesn't straight match to one word in Greek. Like I always talk about the example of different words that are used for love, and most translations they just whittle it down to one and just say sometimes those differences are important. So the Amplified Bible is an interpretation where they try to put more context around the words. And so for example, when agape is translated as love, it says love, and then it says, but not brotherly love or charitable love, the godly kind of love. It explains which love it's using. So follow along in King James Version, or whatever you're reading, and you'll see it's the same. This just helps me at least have a better understanding of what's being said there. So the 10th chapter of Matthew. And Jesus summoned to him his 12 disciples and gave them power and authority over unclean spirits to drive them out and to cure all kinds of disease and all kinds of weakness and infirmity. Now these are the names of the 12 apostles, special messengers. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, son of Zebedee, John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, who is Nathanael, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Judas, not Iscariot. Simon the Canaan and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Jesus sent out these 12, charging them, go nowhere among the Gentiles, and do not go into any town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he's saying to this group, remember Paul talks about later on going out preaching to the Gentiles, or preaching to the Jews. There's discussions, about like Peter dining with outsiders of the church. But in this initial directive, Jesus is saying, don't go out yet and try to spread the message to the non-Jewish people. I'm telling you, within our own house, within the Church of Judaism, start there. Tell people, because these are the people who've been studying the same stuff that I've been studying. The laws of the Jews, all the way back to Mosaic law, and they're familiar with it. And I'm going to explain to these people why I'm the fulfillment of what's written there. That's what Jesus is saying to his followers. Saying they're going to understand the prophecies leading up to them, and I'm going to explain to them that I am part of that. So we're going to start with them. Sent out these 12, charging them, go nowhere among the Gentiles, don't go into the town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, drive out demons. Freely, without pay, you have received, freely, without charge, give. Take no gold nor silver, nor even copper money in your purses or belts, and do not take a provision bag or a wallet for a collection bag for your journey, nor 2 undergarments, nor sandals, nor a staff, for the workman deserves his support, his living is food. And into whatever town or village you go, inquire who in it is deserving, and stay there, at his house, until you leave that vicinity. As you go into the house, give your greetings and wish it well. Then if indeed that house is deserving, let come upon it your peace, that is, freedom from all the distresses that are experienced as the result of sin. But if it is not deserving, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive and accept and welcome you nor listen to your message, as you leave that house or town, shake the dust of it from your feet. Truly I tell you, it shall be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. Behold, I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wary and wise as serpents, and be innocent, harmless, guileless, without falsity as doves. And that's a reference to Genesis 3:1, when they're describing that type of innocence. And remember, so this is talking about going within your own people, in the house of Israel. Go from town to town. These are people who were raised under Jewish law and asked to stay at their homes and try to preach to them. And if they refuse, you shake it off. He says, I'm sending you like sheep in the midst of wolves. He's not talking about going out to outsiders and trying to preach. He's talking about going and preaching to your own people. Your own people are wolves, and you are sheep. That's what Jesus is telling them. Be on guard against men whose way or nature is to act in opposition to God. For they will deliver you up to councils and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be brought before governors and kings for my sake as a witness to bear testimony before them and to the Gentiles, the nations. But when they deliver you up, do not be anxious about how or what you are to speak, for what you are to say will be given you in that very hour and moment. For it is not you who are speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver up brother to death, and the father his child, and children will take a stand against their parents, and will have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who perseveres and endures to the end will be saved from spiritual disease and death in the world to come. When they persecute you in one town, that is, pursue you in a manner that would injure you and cause you to suffer because of your belief, flee to another town. For truly I tell you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor is a servant or a slave above his master. It is sufficient for the disciple to be like his teacher, and the servant or slave like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, master of the dwelling, how much more will they speak evil of those of his household? And then Jesus is quoting 2 Kings. So have no fear of them, for nothing is concealed that will not be revealed, or kept secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered in the ear, proclaim upon the housetops. And do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather be afraid of him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Gehenna is the word that's actually used. That's an example that caught my attention in reading these different translations. In King James Version, I think, the New International Version, and even the New American Standard, those are the 4 ones that I have lined up next to each other in mine. They all just translate that as hell. But I guess the word that was used in the original Greek was Gehenna, which was actually a physical place. It was outside the walls of Jerusalem. It was a valley of Henna. So I think Gehenna means like Valley Henna or something along those lines. And it was a place where people outside of Jerusalem, a lot of pagans and things, I guess, would have rituals like burning sacrifices to gods. And then as time went on, the area became kind of like a dumping grounds, and there was a perpetual fire burning in that valley where they would dump their trash. So it was the landfill for Jerusalem. They would go out there and burn bodies. And so that kind of became a symbol of like the bad place and punishment. So I guess a lot of times in translations here, hell is translated from Hades, or from, there's another Hebrew word, I don't remember what it is, where sometimes it just means like place of the dead, as in like an afterlife, and other times they're trying to say place of punishment, like hell. And that all just kind of got wrapped into one word when it was translated into the King James Version. And I think it really, I don't know, for me it makes it a little more powerful. And I guess the context around it too is that word is actually used as slang. Because that was an actual place, or if you were in Jerusalem and you're on that side of the city, you could look over the wall and see black smoke rising. And in that valley, that was where the fires never end, and that was where evil people doing evil things were, and that's where you burned dead bodies. It was actually something that people could relate to. And so that became slang for hell, or not even necessarily like an actual place of hell, but a place when God's kingdom comes, where everyone's going to be cast into eternal punishment. It was something Jesus gave them, like a visual of, nobody can wrap their heads around what that means, what a place of eternal punishment and damnation means. And he pointed out, he said it's like this physical place, never ending fires and stuff. That was really powerful to me when I learned that, made that connection. So it says both, be afraid of him who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. And not two little sparrows sold for a penny, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground without your Father's leave or consent and notice. But even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not then, you are of more value than many sparrows. Therefore everyone who acknowledges me before men and confesses me out of a state of oneness with me, I will also acknowledge him before my Father who is in heaven, and confess that I am abiding in him. But whoever denies and disowns me before men, I also will deny and disown him before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace upon the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to part asunder a man from his father, and a daughter from her mother, and a newly married wife from her mother-in-law. And a man's foes will be they of his own household. He who loves and takes more pleasure in father or mother more than in me is not worthy of me. And he who loves and takes more pleasure in son or daughter more than in me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take up his cross and follow me cleaves steadfastly to me, conforming wholly to my example in living, and if need be in dying also, is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his lower life will lose it, the higher life, and whoever loses his lower life on my account will find it, the higher life. He who receives and welcomes and accepts you receives and welcomes and accepts me. And he who receives and welcomes and accepts me receives and welcomes and accepts him who sent me. He who receives and welcomes and accepts a prophet, because he is a prophet, shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives and welcomes and accepts a righteous man, because he is a righteous man, shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives to one of these little ones in rank or influence, even a cup of cold water, because he is my disciple, surely I declare to you, he shall not lose his reward. When Jesus had finished his charge to his 12 disciples, he left there to teach and to preach in their cities, in Galilean cities. Now I want to jump forward to 13. Matthew 13. That same day Jesus went out of the house and was sitting beside the sea, and such great crowds gathered about him, and he had got into a boat and remained sitting there, while all the throng stood on the shore. And he told them many things in parables, stories by way of illustration and comparison, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell by the roadside, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they had not much soil, and at once they sprang up because they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they dried up and withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. Other seeds fell on good soil and yielded grain, some 100 times as much as was sown, some 60 times as much, some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him be listening, and let him consider and perceive and comprehend by hearing. Then the disciples came to him and said, why do you speak to them in parables? And he replied to them, to you it has been given to know the secrets and mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has spiritual knowledge, to him will more be given, and he will be furnished richly, so that he will have abundance. But from him who is not, even what he has will be taken away. This is the reason that I speak to them in parables, because having the power of seeing, they do not see, and having the power of hearing, they do not hear, nor do they grasp and understand. In them indeed is the process of fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, you shall indeed hear, and hear but never grasp and understand. And you shall indeed look, and look but never see and perceive. For this nation's heart has grown gross, fat, and dull, and their ears heavy and difficult of hearing, and their eyes they have tightly closed, lest they see and perceive with their eyes, and hear and comprehend the sense with their ears, and grasp and understand with their heart, and turn, and I should heal them. But blessed, happy, fortunate, be envied, are your eyes because they do see, and your ears because they do hear. Truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous men, men who are upright and in right standing with God, yearned to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. Listen then to the meaning of the parable of the sower. While anyone is hearing the word of the kingdom, and does not grasp and comprehend it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the roadside. As for what was sown on thin or rocky soil, this is he who hears the word and at once welcomes and accepts it with joy. Yet it has no real root in him, but is temporary, inconstant, lasts but a little while. And when affliction or trouble or persecution comes on account of the word, at once he is caused to stumble. He is repelled and begins to distrust and desert him who he ought to trust and obey, and he falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is he who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the pleasures and delight and glamour and deceitfulness of riches choke and suffocate the word, and it yields no fruit. As for what was sown on good soil, this is he who hears the word and grasps and comprehends it. He indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100 times as much as was sown, and another 60 times as much, and another 30. Another parable he set forth before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. For while he was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed also a darnel, his weeds resembling wheat, among the wheat, and went on his way. So when the plant sprouted and formed grain, the darnel, weeds, appeared also. And the servants of this owner came to him and said, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Then how does it have darnel shoots in it? He replied to them, An enemy has done this. The servant said to him, Then do you want us to go and weed them out? But he said, No, lest in gathering the wild wheat, the weeds resembling the wheat, you root up the true wheat along with it. Let them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will say to the reapers, Gather the darnel first, and bind it in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my granary. Another story by way of comparison. He set forth before them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took, sowed in his field. Of all the seeds it is the smallest, but when it has grown It is the largest of the garden herbs and becomes a tree so that the birds of the air come and find shelter in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, sour dough, which a woman took and covered over in 3 measures of meal or flour till all of it was leavened. These things all taken together, Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, without a parable, he said nothing to them. This was in fulfillment of what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things that have been hidden since the foundation of the world. Then he left the throngs and went into the house. And his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the darnel in the field. He answered, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed means the children of the kingdom. The darnel is the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed it is the devil. The harvest is the closing and consummation of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the darnel, the weeds resembling the wheat, is gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the close of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of offense, persons by whom others are drawn into error or sin, and all who do iniquity and act wickedly, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be weeping and wailing and grinding of teeth. Then will the righteous, those who are upright, and made standing with God, shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let him who has ears to hear be listening, and let him consider and perceive and understand by hearing. The kingdom of heaven is like something precious buried in a field, which a man found and hid again. Then in his joy he goes and sells all he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who is a dealer in search of fine and precious pearls, who on finding a single pearl of great price, went and sold all he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet which was cast into the sea and gathered in fish of every sort. When it was full, men dragged it up on the beach and sat down and sorted out the good fish into baskets, but the worthless ones they threw away. So it will be at the close and consummation of the age. The angels will go forth and separate the wicked from the righteous, those who are upright and in right standing with God, and cast them, the wicked, into the furnace of fire. There will be weeping and wailing and grinding of teeth. Have you understood all these things, these parables taken together? They said to him, Yes, Lord. He said to them, Therefore every teacher and interpreter of the sacred writings who has been instructed about and trained in the kingdom of heaven and has become a disciple is like a householder who brings forth out of his storehouse treasure that is new, and treasure that is old, and the fresh as well as the familiar. When Jesus had finished these parables, these comparisons, he left there, and coming to his own country, Nazareth, he taught in their synagogues, so that they were amazed with bewildered wonder, and said, Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph, Simon and Judas? And do not all his sisters live here among us? Where then did this man get all this? And they took offense at him. They were repelled and hindered from acknowledging his authority and caused to stumble. But Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country and in his own house. And he did not do many works of power there because of their unbelief, their lack of faith in the divine mission of Jesus. And now Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came up and asked Jesus, Who then is really the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called a little child to himself and put him in the midst of them, and said, Truly I say to you, unless you repent, change, turn about, become like little children, trusting, lowly, loving, forgiving, you can never enter the kingdom of heaven at all. Whoever will humble himself, therefore, and become like this little child, trusting, lowly, loving, forgiving, is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives and accepts and welcomes one little child like this for my sake, and in my name, receives and accepts and welcomes me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in and acknowledge and cleave to me to stumble and sin, that is, who entices him or hinders him in right conduct or thought, it would be better, more expedient, and profitable, and advantageous for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be sunk in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world for such temptations to sin and influences to do wrong. It is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the person on whose account or by whom the temptation comes. And if your hand or your foot causes you to stumble in sin, cut it off and throw it away from you. It is better, more profitable, more wholesome for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble in sin, pluck it out and throw it away from you. It is better, more profitable and wholesome for you to enter life with only 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the hell, Gehenna, of fire. Beware that you do not despise or feel scornful toward or think little of one of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven their angels always are in the presence of and look upon the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man came to save from the penalty of eternal death that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray and gets lost, will he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go in search of the one that is lost? And if it should be that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices more over it than over the 99 that did not get lost. Just so, it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost and perish. If your brother wrongs you, go and show him his fault between you and him privately. If he listens to you, you have won back your brother. But if he does not listen, take along with you 1 or 2 others, so that every word may be confirmed and upheld by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he pays no attention to them, refusing to listen and obey, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a pagan and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you forbid and declare to be improper and unlawful on earth must be what is already forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit and declare proper and lawful on earth must be what is already permitted in heaven. Again I tell you, if 2 of you on earth agree, harmonize together, or make a symphony together, about whatever, anything and everything they may ask, it will come to pass and be done for them by my Father in heaven. For wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, drawn together as my followers, in and into my name, there I am in the midst of them. Then Peter came up to him and said, Lord, how many times may my brother sin against me, and I forgive him and let it go? As many as up to 7 times? Jesus answered him, I tell you, not up to 7, but 70 times 7. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a human king who wished to settle accounts with his attendants. When he began the accounting, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents, probably about $10 million. That would be like something that we would say equivalent today. A lot. And because he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and his children and everything that he possessed and payment to be made. So the attendant fell on his knees, begging him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And his master's heart was moved with compassion, and he released him and forgave him, canceling the debt. But that same attendant, as he went out, found one of his fellow attendants who owed him 100 denarii. That would be like $20 to us. And he caught him by the throat and said, pay what you owe. So his fellow attendant fell down and begged him earnestly, give me time and I will pay you all. But he was unwilling, and he went out and had him put in prison till he should pay the debt. When his fellow attendants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and told everything that had taken place to their master. And his master called him and said to him, "You contemptible and wicked attendant, I forgave and canceled all that great debt of yours because you begged me to. And should you not have had pity and mercy on your fellow attendant as I had pity and mercy on you?" And in wrath his master turned him over to the torturers, the jailers, till he should pay all that he owed. So also my heavenly Father will deal with every one of you if you do not freely forgive your brother from your heart his offenses. Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went into the part of Judea that is beyond the Jordan. When you break down the book this way, you can kind of see how they separate these different, they call them discourses or sermons. And they all end, the same way. And then Jesus was done talking and he moved on to another area. He talked to his disciples within the church. And then he went out and he preached in different cities in Galilee. I want you to turn to 23rd chapter. And I think it's important to remember who he's talking to in each one of these two. Actually, I'm going to start with Matthew. Uh, 22 and the 34th verse. Actually, maybe you can go a little bit further back for context. Let's start with the 23rd verse of Matthew 22 and 23. The same day some Sadducees who say that there is no resurrection of the dead came to him, and they asked him a question, saying, "Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies, leaving no children, his brother shall marry the widow and raise up a family for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no children left his wife to his brother. The second also died childless, and the third down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died also. Now in the resurrection, to which of the 7 will she be wife? For they all had her." But Jesus replied to them, "You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor God's power. For in the resurrected state, neither do men marry, nor are women given in marriage, but they are like the angels in heaven. But as to the resurrection of the dead, have you never read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living." And when the throng heard it, they were astonished and filled with glad amazement at his teaching. Now when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced and muzzled the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of their number, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which kind of commandment is great and important, the principal kind in the law? Some commandments are light, which ones are heavy?" And he replied to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and intellect. This is the great, most important, principal, and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as you do yourself. These 2 commandments sum up, and upon them depend all the law and the prophets." If you grew up in this church, you know that that's what our pastor preached. And how I keep talking about trying to trace it back to the black and white, the outline, when somebody claims the name of Jesus, which I also recently learned. I talked about this a few weeks ago. The commandment not to take the Lord's name in vain, it includes, but it's not limited to, saying, "damn it," when something happens, asking God to condemn something. That's what you're doing when you do that. You're calling down the power of God. You're saying, God, judge that door that stubbed my toe for me, judge it. Or that person, send them to hell because they hurt my feelings. And that's the easy one when we talk about taking God's name in vain. But a lot more powerful than that is the idea of swearing by it. And it's not just saying, I swear to God, because we're taught you don't do that. Paul says, don't swear to no one. And you don't swear to God because then you say, I swear to God that this is going to happen. I swear to God I'm going to do that. Then you're invoking God's power and you have no right to do that. Because he created you, you don't command God. But swearing in God's name is also claiming that something is God's will or God's message. So that commandment, what it's really about, is people out there saying, this is what God says. Saying, I'm going to rule this, it was ordained by God. Saying, I'm going to do something, it was ordained by God. Saying, these few verses, like they did during I read recently about it during the, I can't think of the word, the times leading up to the Civil War in America. A lot of people that defended the slave trade in the South, they used Scripture and the Bible to defend it. And they said, well, look, God said what we're doing is okay. That is breaking that commandment when you're saying God said this. And the more I've realized that, the more important it's become to me to figure out, well, what exactly did God say? And more importantly than that, what did he say through his son, Jesus Christ? Because that defines everything. Like we talked about the last time I preached, in law we're taught to study, here's the law or the rule, and that exists because this case or this law that happened before it, and this case or this law that happened before it, and so you trace it back. And sometimes there's a change in there, and if something changes in the law, then it goes off this way. So you got to trace it back, and then you trace it forward. Because a lot of times a case that says something in the past, that's no longer correct law. The law has changed. But if the cases one after another, they keep saying, yes, this is still the law, yes, this is still the law, yes, this is still the law, yes, this is still the law. So the same thing happens in this book of law. You've got a few thousand years of history recorded and what the law is and what the prophecies are, and they all refer back to it. They said, I say this like Moses said it. I say this like Isaac said it. And that's how Jesus established his authority to the people in the church. That's how he explained to them. Not that he made his authority came through God. But the way he convinced people that he was who he was referring to them, like it said, go out to your own people first, because they understand the Scripture. They've read it, they've studied it. They're the lawyers that go through this and explain to them, look at your law. It says I'm going to be here. It says I'm the Son of God. It says that this is how it's going to be fulfilled, and now it's happening. You want proof? You all studied the Hebrew law and the history. You all studied the same stuff that I studied. Look at this verse. Look at this verse. Look at Jesus was being a lawyer. And that was what he argued to the Sadducees and the Pharisees. That's how he proved his point. Like I said, that's not what made him the Son of God, but that's how he was able to establish or prove to others that he was. And he shared that information with the prophets. And through that he shared, or with his disciples. And through that he shared it with us by being recorded here in the Bible. So why is that important? Because a lot of times people claiming that it's teachings of Christ, or they say it's Christian, a lot of things that other people attach to Christianity from outside the church. They're referencing things in the Old Testament that no longer apply because the law changed. Now Jesus said, I didn't come to destroy the law. I came to fulfill it. What he's talking about there was that he's fulfilling the prophecy. That was part of the law, is that he's going to come and he fulfills it because that happened. He's saying, I didn't come down to tear down the law, but he changed the law. Now in his sermons, I've preached on this before, a few times he points out very specific ones that no longer apply, like the eye for an eye thing. He says, you've heard it say, eye for an eye. I say, turn the other cheek. So anybody who quotes that and say, this is Christian, if you're Christian, you believe eye for an eye, you're wrong. You need to read the Bible. You need to study. You need to see what actually happened, because that was the old law. The new law is turn the other cheek. And those two things, they can't exist at the same time. It's one or the other. It's vengeance, eye for an eye, or it's turn the other cheek and walk away and let it happen. The forgiveness stuff, again, I've talked about this before, the 70 times 70, that was a way of saying forever. Apparently that was a saying in Hebrew and Aramaic, 7 times, or 7 times 77. And so when they come to Jesus and they say, okay, it keeps doing this to me over and over. How many times am I supposed to forgive him before finally, like, I give up and I get my retribution? 7 times, is that enough? And Jesus says, no, never stop. Just keep on forgiving, keep on doing it. And that, again, is different than the old law, because the law changed. So above all, what changed when Jesus came? The ability to escape eternal damnation, not through works, but through the gift of grace. We are not to be held accountable to the fact that we are human beings and imperfect, as long as we accept that one great truth, that he is the Son of God and our only path to salvation. And then once we do that, we are expected to do everything else that he taught. Because if we don't, then we're only taking the good part. We're only saying, okay, I agree with you, Jesus, you're the Son of God, but all that other stuff he said, we're not really going to do that. We're just going to, that one part you teach, I like that, because I get forgiveness. But all that other stuff you taught, eye for an eye. No, I'm not going to forgive. No, I'm going to go with the old law. I like that better. Let's have the death penalty. Let's do this. Let's do that. It doesn't work that way. And it's only become that apparent to me in recent years because the last few years since preaching, I've read more of this than I ever have in my whole life. I'm thankful for that, for the knowledge that doing this has forced me to gain in studying. I have a long way to go, and a lot of people know a lot more about it. All of that, what I'm trying to get at with the law. Now, some laws remain. All of the law has changed as far as judgment. It doesn't mean that we don't have laws here on earth. It doesn't mean that the old law doesn't apply in some situations. But in some situations, it flat out, black and white, does not. The eye for an eye one is an example of that. Jesus said it with his own mouth, with his own words. He said, nope, don't do that anymore. It doesn't get any clearer than that. All the other stuff you can argue, because he said, again, he came to fulfill it. He didn't say no more punishment when you commit crimes. He understood that we have to have laws here on earth. He said, you make laws here on earth like the laws that are in heaven. And God is going to look at all of that too. But he said, you as an individual, or you as groups of individuals, when he's talking to his following, a group of 12, you as the people who vote for laws, you don't get to put the blame on somebody else if you're the one who made it happen. What did the law actually say? What did Jesus say the law actually says now? When I say now, I mean 2,000 years ago, and now, and any time after 2,000 years ago. You can boil it all down to that. I wanted to go. I didn't even make it into the 23rd chapter where I was going with it, but I think this is a good point to wrap it up. I think in Matthew, there's these 5 sections of the Sermon on the Mount, and then the 3 we just read, and then the 23rd chapter of Matthew. Those are the big discussions, sermons that Jesus had. And then if you read in Luke, you can decide whether or not you want to believe it happened up on the mountain or if it happened when he got down to the bottom of the mountain. But all of that's in there. That's what he taught. That's what he said. Those are the things. That is being Christian. That is Christianity. So when somebody walks the line, or maybe flat out breaks that commandment about taking God's name in vain, saying this is what God said, this is God's law, refer back to those sections, because that's the closest information we have to what Jesus actually taught, to what Jesus is actually still to this day telling us to do, is right there. And if you want to boil it all down, a one-liner, a sound bite, the reason that Jesus answered this lawyer this way, aside from the fact because it's the truth and it's the Word of God, but it's because these two commandments that he gives, Jesus' command, they encompass everything else. Everything that you do, everything that you think, everything that you believe. If it doesn't line up with this, then you're not doing it right. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Lord in heaven, thank you for bringing us together here today. Please help us in our daily lives to be mindful of your teachings and mindful of what we do and say and support, and whether or not it lines up with your teachings. Please help us to remember to reflect inwardly, and when somebody claims that something is in line with your word, we know that you've given us the word and this Bible to rely on. We know that you've given us our own minds to think and hearts to feel. Please help us to remember that it's our duty to confirm whether or not something is your word and your will, instead of just assuming that it is, putting the blame on the person who said so. We understand that judgment for someone who leads us astray is reserved for you, but that doesn't absolve us of judgment that is due us if, instead of relying on your word and your teachings, we rely on what somebody falsely says it to be. Please help us to remember that throughout our daily lives as we make small decisions and big decisions about how we conduct our life. And when we fall, Lord, please help us to come back to you, and before we ask forgiveness, to recognize that we have sinned in doing that. To recognize and to call out to you that we know that we did something that was not in line with your word, and then ask you to forgive us. We know that's what you've taught us, Lord, and we are faithful and confident in knowing that the promise you have given us will be fulfilled if we live up to what you've commanded us. And we thank you for that opportunity of eternal salvation. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Take up this morning tithes and offering.